All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the EU House, if it's your first event, or welcome back if you've been participating with us thus far. So we've got a great conversation coming up with Philippa Hughes, who's a social sculptor from Washington, D.C. My name is Christine Vest. I'm the Senior Cultural Affairs Officer at the EU delegation based in Washington, and I'm very excited to be presenting this conversation, which is all about art as activism. So the question that we're asking today is, can art really change the world? So first we're going to hear from Mia Florentine Weiss, who is a German sculptor. She was supposed to be on this panel today, and then she got COVID and completely lost her voice. So we have a video message, which we're going to play now, and then we'll just kick off right into the panel. Enjoy.
Hello everyone from my studio in Berlin. I am an artist. My name is Mia Florentine Weiss. I'm the mother of Love Hate, and actually, as you can see, I always write things on my hand, and this is exactly how the story of Love Hate began. I was going overseas, traveling and studying. It was actually, I think, my first plane trip to the United States. And I was sitting on the window and I had love written on my hand. And when I looked into the mirror, like the window, which was dark, I could get a glimpse of the reflection of it and thought that could be hate. And when I went home, I made a draft and a design, and all of a sudden, Love Hate was born. And it's a very special artwork to me. It's an ambigram, which means it's a one-word poem. From one side it says love, and from the other it says hate. It's an ambiguous message in a way, and for me it's always a homage to Goethe's Faust, and it symbolizes how easily something negative can turn into something positive. So literally, hate turns into love, or the other way around. And I think it is a giant message all over the world. We have many sculptures all over Europe, and now the first step towards the United States. I think it's a very good symbol for us to remind ourselves that we can make a choice every day. And I think as much as art is system relevant anyway, so are we. Human beings are system relevant, art is system relevant, love is system relevant. And I think the stronger our connection is towards people, towards the environment, towards ourselves, the more humanly we can live. And that is a little message from me to you. Basically, we have only one life and we have only one planet, so let's choose love.
So instead of doing sort of boring introductions where we're like, I'm going to read you my resume, we're going to introduce ourselves by talking about a specific project that we have each worked on in terms of our art and our activism. So I'll kick off, and that was a really great way to, it was a great introduction to what I'm about to say, which is that after the 2016 election, I was really upset, like a lot of people in my little blue bubble. And so my first instinct was to invite Trump voters over to my house for dinner. And so I made dinner for people who did not agree with me in terms of the outcome of the election. And I didn't intend for it to become an art project. I just did it because I like cooking dinner and I like talking to people. I'm really curious. It turned into, after a couple years of doing that for, every month or so for a couple years, it turned into a national art project called Looking for America, in which I traveled around the country, and I went as far as Anchorage, Alaska. I went to El Paso, Texas, and I asked people, what does it mean to be American? And we did it in the context of art. We had artists responding to that question in an exhibit, through poetry, through dance, and then we asked people from across the political spectrum to respond to the art and then to respond to each other around this question of what it means to be American. And the fundamental idea around that was, in part, art as an entryway into the conversation, but also I call myself a social sculptor. I was trying to sculpt a space for relational interaction to happen, so that, you know, the idea being through conversation, through relationships, is the way we're going to find solutions to the societal problems that we're facing right now. And so using art as just sort of almost tricking people as a way into having those conversations that I hoped would lead toward actual change in our society. And so that's the most significant project that I've been working on for the last 5 years, and I'd love to tell you more about that, but I want to throw it over to Shannon, and would you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Shannon Gunn. I am a working musician and a jazz artist. I create music and I produce projects, including co-founding the Jazz and Freedom Festival in 2015 and running the Jazz for Justice nonprofit, and also producing Jazz Girls Day in order to help young women try to pursue jazz without boundaries of gender.
Awesome. Jason?
Yes, my name is Jason Diakitay. I am a holder of both an American and a Swedish passport. Right now I'm living in Sweden, where I was also born. And in Sweden, we're heading into an election in September of this year. And I was thinking about what I could, how I could contribute to the conversation leading up to the election, and ultimately kind of take an active stance against the rise of fascism in the country that I live in and love so dearly. And I thought back to a moment in 1992 when I was at a demonstration protesting a Nazi march that was held every year on the 30th of November in the small town of Lund, where I was born. There were some key people, from both sides, let's say, at this demonstration. And so I am currently working on a project that's going to fuse storytelling with music. It will be an audio experience, but an audio experience containing both atmospheric sounds, using old newsreels and news clips, but also music that I'm writing to tell a story from 1992 to 2022 of how I got here in these past 30 years, but also how this country that I love so much got to the point that they are today, which is one of the projects I'm working on now.
Awesome. Courtney?
And I'm Courtney Applequist. I am a visual artist working mostly in the medium of drawing and painting. And for the last year, I've been working with a multimodal artist collective that was started a project called Taxonomy of Breathing that was looking at everything that had happened over the course of 2020, 2022, or 21, through the lens of breath, connecting environmental issues, starting with the wildfires that happened back in 2019, and then going into the pandemic, which was a global situation, obviously, and then issues of structural racism when George Floyd was killed in the uprising of the Black Lives Matter movement, and recognizing how we didn't just land in 2020 in a vacuum, that there were structural issues that were happening globally that led us to that moment, and taking the time of COVID, where it really put a mirror up to the brokenness of a lot of systems. And so the research project was visually connecting all of those pieces on what we called a map, which was a diagram, and then understanding that our perspective was not nearly going to cover such a global issue. We sent the map around to 100 people around the world with instructions to comment and add their perspectives, and then they sent them back to us, that we aggregated all of those responses into one collective archive of this moment, which then led to further more abstracted visual and sound projects that gave voice to a wider range of people's experiences over the last couple years.
Okay. Well, you know, I've been in the art world for a long time, curating, producing, advocating for the arts in Washington, D.C., which is where I live, and I've been there for 20 years. And I have always loved politics, but I never actually melded the two until I got really excited around 2016. And so that was sort of a turning point for me. 2016 made me feel compelled to do something. And so art event, you know, was sort of a natural, that was a natural pathway for me. Like, was there a turning point for any of you all in terms of, you know, did the art come before the activism, or the activism came before the art? And what compelled you to intersect art and activism together?
Do you want me to go first?
Sure. Yeah. Why don't you go first?
Well, I have really been more in the activist role for the last 5 or 6 years, I would say. But the activist role was inspired by events probably about 20 years ago now, when I observed and participated in a concert at Michigan State University for Martin Luther King Jr. birthday, King Jr.'s birthday. And in the concert, we performed the music of Max Roach. And it was the first time I had been exposed to jazz as social justice music. And that got me thinking, and I got myself set up as a teacher, and then I started to put together events and produce concerts and festivals and try to figure out how can I help that spirit move on and help change the world.
Yeah, thank you. Jason?
I think one of a few turning points was in 1999. I was working on completing my first album, because my main gig is that I rap, and I've been doing so for about 30 years. And up until 1999, I'd always written lyrics in English, because this is where hip hop came from, and that was the lingua franca of hip hop culture. But 99, I decided to start writing in the Swedish language to see what would happen then. And I had almost completed my album. I had one track left to write, and I thought, hey, well, let me write a song about that time when I was in the small town neighboring the town where I'm from, and I was chased by skinheads. So I started writing the song. My friend that I trust and love came by, and he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm writing this song. I thought I'd write something, anti-racist. I'm writing this story about how these skinheads chased me in Staffanstorp. And he's like, man, we've heard this story before. Why don't you tell us something we haven't heard before? Well, I was a little disheartened. I tore up the lyrics, and then I started on a new song where I picture myself, I picture two people traveling on a train, looking at each other. And the first verse, you get to hear the thoughts of the Swedish man who's looking at the foreigner, and all the prejudices and judgments he has of this man, and also of his own, he tells of his own life. And in the second verse, it's the non-Swedish, non-white person you get to hear inside his head. The song was called Pendelparanoia, which basically translates to, commuting paranoia. And after the album was released, I started realizing, and I started performing with it, that people wanted to talk to me about that song. And I started getting a reaction from audiences that was like really starting conversations, and people started sharing their own experiences with me. And I just realized then that I could use the art of emceeing to actually start and provoke conversations with people about something that has been extremely important for myself and my family, being people of color in the country of Sweden. So yeah, that's the year 2000. It really changed. And then since then, I've used a lot of my kind of musical time to speak about social justice topics that are important to me and my community.
I mean, that definitely fits in a lot with what Courtney and I talk about all the time. Is like, I have a friend who he works in politics in DC, and he called my work hand wavy. He's like, why do you even do that? Like, what difference are you making? And so, I've been thinking a lot. Like, why are we using art? And so you just kind of put your finger on one piece of it. It's like, it provokes emotions. It provokes this conversation that we don't seem to be having in a productive way. Like, do you think that it's happening productively through your work?
I mean, for me personally, it's led to me having a lot of conversations with people that I feel are very productive, because it's very empowering for me that if I share that's what the art of, or the kind of power of storytelling is it's so real, because when you share your story and you're lucky to have somebody actually hear you in that, it also compels them to share their stories.
Yeah.
And to also realize, well, hey, I also have a story, And it's when we share our stories with each other and hear each other that we can actually start to begin to walk in each other's shoes, not, being too altruistic about it, but just starting and having those conversations, and actually have people tell me, what happened to me? I was, or what happened to my family. I just felt that it made me feel a lot less alone as a person of color in Sweden. So it's really, for very personal reasons, been important.
Yeah. I want to put a pin in that, because I could not agree with you more. But I want to come back around to that point, because I think we have to lead, how does that lead to an actual change in our society? So I want to come back to that.
And how does art...
Oh, I'm sorry.
Are we going back to the question of...
Yeah.
Can art change the world?
Well, how did you come to this art activism?
Right, so...
What compelled you?
It really was more of a natural, I was coming from, there was an actual moment, really. When I started working with the collective, as a painter, I had been working by myself, and in the moment of the pandemic, and there were so many issues that I wanted to be able to address once I started working with a group of other artists and realizing that maybe the medium that I was in was not actually giving me the pathway to connect with people in the way that I wanted to. And so it was, rather than a specific issue, it was more an attitude of projects that were community-based, that addressing social issues in creative ways to invite the community and other people, give platform for other people's voices, really. So, and using art as, art is the labor that as artists, this is our work, this is our labor, this is how we are in the world, and using that to both express and invite people to question what it means to be a citizen in the world.
Yeah. What do you think makes a good art activist?
I think finding a place to elevate voices that are not being heard, creating that platform. So it's less about what I have to say and more about giving the platform for other people who maybe don't have voice to be heard.
Yeah.
I love that, Courtney, because I would say also, just to add on to that, being a good listener, or the artist who is a good listener and observer, basically.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of the social issues that we have are because we don't have the language that, at least it's the language that I might be using may be heard in someone else's context in a very different way than what I'm trying to say. And so sometimes with, at least with the visual and really any kind of art, you can get in between those disconnects in language to find that place to connect.
I mean, kind of on that point, like for example, one of the ways that we were using art to help people express, give them the voice, was through poetry. And so what I realized through this experience was that there's like this idea that everybody's an artist, but I don't think everybody is necessarily an artist. We can all be creative. But I think what we did was we connected people with artists and used the artistic means to help people express themselves. So I was using poetry as an example in which poets, in our example, we would have people talk to poets and have them answer this question: what does it mean to be American writ large? And then in our case, poets would write poems for them on the spot, reflecting back what the person had just told them. And then we would read those aloud. And it sounds very simple, but like literally people were crying because it was a different means of expression that had not been given to them before. And it was it was this joint process of creation. And when you have a shared experience of creation, that's another way to create connections between humans, essentially. And so it's the creation process, it's the giving people the power to express themselves in a way that they never would have been able to on their own, but through sort of using the artist as the medium for that expression. So I'm thinking about, like, are there ways in which your art can help people express themselves, be the expression?
I think in jazz, there's a tradition of the jazz jam. And in every Jazz for Justice concert that we do and the Jazz and Freedom Festival, I make sure, and also Jazz Girls Day, I make sure at the end that there is a very democratic process. Everybody gets up and everybody has a chance to say what they have to say. And it builds community, and it gives energy towards whatever cause is being amplified for that particular event. And so I think we have a tradition in jazz for that. Wayne Shorter defines jazz as I dare you, and it is freedom of expression, and it gives us the opportunity to share with each other our thoughts about different ideas and values and whatever.
I want to dig into jazz a little bit more too. Can you talk a little bit, backstage we're talking about jazz as diplomacy. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so jazz has a history not only with social justice as it was born out of oppression in the 1920s. It gave voice to those who couldn't speak, but it also allowed the United States to send entertainers around the world and to have what's called soft diplomacy, which is basically giving the United States the ability to build partnerships and collaborations. And you can do it with instrumental music, and there's no words, but people still have an affinity towards it because of the beauty of the art form.
Yeah. I spent last fall in France, and while I was there, they moved Josephine Baker's body into the Pantheon, and she was the first African-American woman, to be in the Pantheon. And so I just always thought that was it was like the French appreciation for jazz is very high. Can you talk a little bit about specific sort of diplomacy of how jazz was spread out into the world, like the way the musicians were sent around?
Yeah, I mean, and we were talking earlier also about jazz or music for the people, by the people, and how it's very republic in that it allows people to have equal say when you get up and play. So I think you had, Jason, you had something to say about that earlier.
Well, I was just thinking when I heard you say that let's also remember that a lot of the reason Thelonious Monk went to Paris, or Miles, or James Baldwin for that matter, was also to find a space where they can breathe and actually survive being black. And not only that, also find an appreciative audience in a whole different way than they did at the times in the in the 40s. Being an African American artist in the United States could be and was many times very, very, very difficult. So I think that maybe the jazz musicians were a step ahead of the powers that be at the time, and then it was realized that, oh, we can use our culture, our soft power, as something that can actually open doors and build bridges and so forth.
Yeah.
But that it actually was a movement started by the artists themselves, I think, for their survival.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to I asked Courtney, what makes what makes good art activism? Do you have any thoughts on that question?
Sure. I mean, impact. I mean, that's a little bit. I don't like to necessarily say you have to have art for a reason. Art is. I just say art is. I don't want to define it. I don't want to box it in. But there are things you can do. You can put things together. You can produce. You can create. Grab your friends. Grab your family. And try to make change. And I don't necessarily want to justify art through change, but I definitely think that art has the power to make change, and it has a lot of untapped potential as far as what you can do with amplifying voices, amplifying ideas, even within your own art as you create it. I wrote a Freedom Immigration Suite a couple of weeks ago, and I premiered it at the Jazz and Freedom Festival, and it was about telling a story of my grandmother who immigrated while incorporating commentary on United States immigration policy. And so I was able to utilize that. It's all instrumental music, but somehow I'm able to get across what I really want people to hear based off the harmonies and the titles, and then a little blurb about each song. So,
can you talk about the Imagine song that you just rearranged?
Oh yes, so it was supposed to come out Friday, but it's been delayed. But for instance, I took John Lennon's Imagine and rearranged it in a way that was reflecting my opinions on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And so it's just my way of saying what I have to say, and this is what jazz is about. I wouldn't call it jazzy because it's fully produced with no jazz, no instruments. It's all just electronic. But I'll be premiering it on this weekend at a gig in DC, and this is just me producing and creating and trying to get people to think. John Lennon wrote Imagine, I don't know how many years ago. I think it was maybe, I don't know. But anyway, that is a song to think about at this time, and think about the words in that song and the lyrics about boundaries and imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly felt recently like, again, I've got to do something more, because of the situation in Ukraine, of the war in Ukraine, and I feel kind of helpless back here in DC, back in the United States. We're very geographically far away, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So, I mean, I think making the world more beautiful through your music is an action, is a civic action.
Assuming the music is beautiful.
Well, when I say beautiful,
sometimes I make ugly music on purpose.
Yeah.
What I want to talk about is not pretty.
Yeah. I will say when I said beautiful, I don't necessarily mean traditionally beautiful, but I get your point, yeah. But, art as a way of providing solace in a terrible world, I think can also be a civic action as well. Are you all doing anything in that respect? Like any responses to the war in Ukraine right now?
I have not reacted in any kind of artistic way yet.
Yeah.
But just to kind of add on to what you were just talking about, also I think art can, besides providing solace and empowerment and inspiration, it can be the emotional soundtrack to a revolution, like we saw during the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring started in Tunisia, and it started with, if I'm getting my facts straight here, a man selling things at the market, kind of self-immolated. He lit himself on fire in protest, and a rapper named El Presidente wrote a song about it, which really, you know, which really made this event very public, and that, you know, months later resulted in the overthrow of the Tunisian government, and then spread like wildfire around the, and it was just really, I was extremely inspirational sitting in Sweden at the time to see how this young people's movement, this very kind of art-driven revolution was, you know, was happening. And it made me want to, you know, pour even more of these emotions into songs that I was writing and the work that I was doing.
Yeah. I mean, like, for me, one of the things about good art activism is that it provokes emotion, or it provokes strong emotions, because at the end of the day, like, we're all human beings who are driven by our emotions. And in fact, just as a little side note, because of the work I do, like, you know, there's a lot of social science around the fact that you can't move people by throwing facts and figures at them. In fact, the more facts and figures you throw at a person, the more you kind of push them into their corner. In terms of their ideology. The way to move people is through emotion. And most of us probably in this room, most human beings believe that we make decisions based on facts, and we're very rational beings. But in fact, the social science says that pretty much we're all making our decisions based on our emotions, and then we find the facts to support the thing that we already decided because of our emotions. So I think that's why, you know, when people criticize art as a hand-wavy way of changing people, I think that's, I mean, the social science says that's wrong, like, because it actually drives our emotions. Do you want to talk about your project with Ukraine?
Sure. So right now, the collective that I'm working with, Icebox Collective, we are in the DC area, trying to get the DMV, Virginia, Maryland, DC area we have multiple collection sites for collecting clothes in the blue and yellow colors of the Ukrainian flag to create a mountain in a public installation display that is alluding to kind of the idea of the Mount of Sisyphus, how it has just become a repetitive problem that we're not, people keep continually losing their lives, and we're not, the structures aren't changing. So a moment to step back, but then also using that kind of as an excuse to gather resources and say we also need to be doing, like right now, there's a both and. We need to be raising funds and getting pragmatic help to the people affected by the war right now, because they're just such an enormous issue. But then we also need to be continually thinking about the larger human factor that this keeps happening all over the world over and over and over again. So.
The other thing I like about that piece too is that it provides an opportunity for people to participate. Because as I mentioned earlier, like, I feel very hopeless. So I'm looking for ways to participate in an action. And even if it's symbolic, you know, I was talking to another friend about symbolic art actions. Sometimes it doesn't feel like, you know, maybe you're not making a specific difference on that. You know, doing that doesn't actually change anything in Ukraine, but it shows the Ukrainian people that we are here thinking, you know, we support them, and it is a very visual representation of our very powerful support for the people.
Right, and I mean, like you said, we're so far away that it does feel sometimes like, well, what can I actually do? And sending money sometimes feels so dissociated from the problem that you don't feel like you're actually doing anything, even though it is. It absolutely is, and kind of having that moment of, rather than feeling paralyzed by helplessness or being overwhelmed with the problem, just the getting in motion of coming and donating these pieces of clothes for this symbolic action at the same time as giving money and practical help, all kind of in the same place.
Yep. And I think,
well,
it brings up another sort of aspect of good arts activism, is that it's a collective action too. It's not just an individual doing a thing. It's like now I am part of something bigger than myself. And that's important on so many levels. And you know, it does inspire people. Again, I will cite social science. It says that, you know, when you feel part of something bigger than yourself, you are more likely to take action. Most people, you know, think about, you know, you just think about human nature. Like, it's hard to take action when it's just you. But when you know that there are others, you're more likely to act. So I think that's another, you know, it's a symbolic thing, but it's also like, I see my part in that bigger thing.
Absolutely, yeah, because it's not something that we can just produce. Like, we are absolutely reliant on the entire area to send and donate to make this mountain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any pitfalls that we should be avoiding as arts activists? What's something that you that you failed at, or that you stumbled when you're doing your work?
I know for my experience, equating jazz as social justice music is not a popular opinion. People don't want to take music and say, oh, this is, you know, something that has a meaning beyond its own entity. But I feel strongly that it is freedom of expression, so I definitely stand an unpopular opinion in that way, and as a result, I think that it has very deep ties to social justice, and it works really well for, you know, concerts, festivals, and talking about, like what you were saying, bringing energy to something and getting people to sort of coalesce and get behind something. You know, these concerts, Jazz for Justice concerts, help people understand. You know, we introduce them to the justice gap and to what it means in America as far as the lack of justice or the need to support pro bono legal services for those who are low-income individuals. So all of that would not be happening if we didn't have a concert and say something about it. So I think that there's deep ties with that. And I've also heard it several times, even within the EU House this weekend, talking about the love-hate sculpture, and the ambassador talking about how the European Union, he said this on Saturday, I was at the event, he was saying that the European Union started 80 years ago out of hate, and hate has become love. And this sculpture he used the sculpture as a symbol of that forging of the European Union's power in love and its ability to come together and coalesce as well around that topic or that idea. So I think that, you know, there's a lot to be said for how art can change the world.
Thank you. Anything that arts activists should be avoiding or be leery of or just be careful about in your, like, that you've experienced?
I'm from hip hop culture. I'm a part of hip hop culture, the global hip hop community. One of the foundational, you know, elements of hip hop culture is graffiti. And a lot of my very dear friends are graffiti writers who choose to use public space that is often only allowed to corporations in their own way to display their art. And that has many times led them landing in jail or being fined or being deemed criminals. So yet and still I enjoy, you know, an extreme privilege as somebody living, you know, as a citizen of a Schengen country, living where I don't have to fear persecution I can write a song about whatever I want to write a song about, and I don't have to fear persecution as rappers that I've met in China, for example, or rappers that I've met in Cuba, or even rappers in the United States. So I would say, from my very privileged position, you know, but I had one experience a year and a half ago because actually, it was longer. It was at the last election of Sweden, 2018. The fascist party actually used one of my song lyrics in their ad. And I talked to one of the Swedish national copyright organizations, because they called me up and were like, "Did you know this?" And I was like, "I did not know this." And they were like, "We'll help you if you want to sue them." But law doesn't work in the same way in Sweden as the United States. It's not very easy to sue people in Sweden, and copyright is not as strict as it is in the United States. But I decided that I couldn't, I had to make a stand, even though it was a very slim chance of success. And I ended up losing, and it cost a lot of money, but at that point I felt like it was more important for me to kind of draw a line in the sand.
Yeah. You know, I have learned a lot of lessons myself over the years. I've made a lot of mistakes. You know, and I like this idea of drawing a line. Like you got to put a stake in the sand, as they say. I'm going to share a mistake I made. You know, I mentioned earlier that I went around the country organizing these conversations all over the country, and the mistake I made was I thought that I could go to each place and have people would leave the conversation saying, "That was amazing, I'm so inspired," and then nothing would happen after that. I would go on to the next city, and then nothing happened. And I wondered why, and I realized, you know, that organizers there's not that many organizers. Like people want to be organized, and so what we have done since then is gone back and organized fellows programs in each of the cities that we went to, so that people who are from that community are on the ground continuously organizing, opening up more opportunities to keep the conversations going. Because not everybody has the capacity, the privilege, the ability to take off, you know, a day from work. You know, some people have to take a bus 2 hours each way to work. They don't have time to organize these conversations, but they want to be part of the conversation. So again, it's incumbent upon those of us who can to do and to continue doing, and not expect that, you know, we're just going to be, as artists, so inspiring that we're just going to like make everybody want to do the thing that we're doing. I think our work continues all the time, and it's sort of endless in a way. And so my mistake was thinking that somehow I was going to like inspire all these people to do a thing when really it's up to me to do the thing. Any mistakes you've ever made, Courtney? I don't want to put you on the spot. Never. No.
No, but I mean, I think more than anything, anytime anyone tries to just make a statement, which is something that I started off doing and realized that it's more about a dialogue than about a conversation. That's the way our practice has shifted, to create those spaces, because change doesn't happen if the structure doesn't change. Like a lot of these problems that keep persisting are because the structures stay the same, and so the problems keep persisting, and you can't create change in structures without creating that space.
Yep.
And that has to be done collectively. So to kind of understand that anything that is my perspective is not going to be, I need to be able to know that that is not the place that the conversation stops in any way. It's not my job to convince someone of my perspective, because their perspective is just as valid. And so if we're going to collectively change a structure, we've all got to be open to the nuances of the different contexts that people are coming from.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, I struggle with that. I was thinking about Audre Lorde, who said that, you know, you can't change a system using the tools that the system provides you. You have to actually invent a new system. And so I've been thinking a lot about how artists, like in my idealism about art, is that artists are the ones who can see this new system, that can see completely different ways of looking at the world. And, you know, I don't, like, part of me, you know, buys into this idea of like this incremental change in the system, but that doesn't seem to be working in the 21st century. Maybe maybe it is, you know, our responsibility as artists to completely invent a new system that is based on a radically different truth than the old system was based on.
Or at least create the space in between the systems, because that's where change can happen.
Pathway.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, you know, the place where those two systems aren't quite meeting, that's where change can happen. We can't maybe see, I can't exactly see what the new system is.
Yeah.
But I can say, it's not this, it's not this, it's somewhere. And if you can create that space through a conversation or a platform,
I mean, the war in Ukraine has you know, in all its brutality and violence and suffering, also kind of puts its finger on a huge opportunity that the world has. It really shines a light on global dependency on fossil fuels. And that conversation could go either way. I mean, I see just, you know, from watching the news in this country, from having been here for a month, on how there is a certain narrative kind of starting out that, well, because the United States had shifted so much resources to green energy, that's why now we have the higher, you know, and the arts and the citizens of this country and every country can actually push back against that narrative now. Because this might well be the kind of opportunity that we need, the crisis, to actually realize that we have to shift to renewable energy sources, for example. It could be this huge opportunity, despite all the suffering and loss of human life. I don't know how, as an artist, I'm still kind of processing just that this is actually happening, and that is happening to Europe, and very close to where so many of the people that I love live. Also, I have artist colleagues in Sweden that have gone down to the Polish border, and there's a lot of activism and footwork going on the ground in Sweden, from what I'm hearing today from the artist communities as well. But I haven't found how I will participate in it yet, but you know, when I get the idea, then.
Yeah. And I think it's like incumbent upon us as Americans to not think about it as somewhere else. Like it is an attack on democracy in Europe is an attack on democracy, our own democracy. It's not somewhere else. And so I think that is our feeling of urgency, even here, even as American artists.
Yeah.
And I think it goes back to what we were talking about backstage, about how to citizen and being a citizen, and that, you know, we are all a part of this. You know, our complacency can speak volumes as well as our activism, and there's space for that. You know.
You know, I'm glad you brought that up. You know, Mia, the artist who of the Love-Hate sculpture, she and I had a long conversation a while ago about complacency. Like, complacency is also a choice, and it speaks volumes as well. And so, you know, we were talking about, like, how do we fight complacency? And I think art hopefully can be a way to, again, provoke the emotion that overcomes our complacency, because that is a choice that we make. I want to read a little something that she wrote also that I feel like it kind of fits in at this moment in our conversation. She says, "Artistic freedom as an indicator of democratic societies must always be defended. History shows that artists, like seismographs, sense social and economic tensions and make them visible to the public through their works. That is why art in public space is the #1 exhibition platform that inspires us for a change of perspective." For her, this is the answer to conflicts of the 21st century. In the terrible example of Ukraine, we see what people around the world are capable of doing to defend their democratic values, which includes artistic freedom. They demonstrate, they show the solidarity, they use the word and the deed, they improvise, they use their creativity, they create a common narrative, and they're literally a living example of how an image can turn into a movement. And for Mia, that's what Love-Hate is. And, you know, I'm particularly attracted to the Love-Hate sculpture because, you know, I'm a writer, and so I'm always attracted to the word. And, you know, I am also particularly attracted to the poetic word, because even the poetic word is a word that hits you viscerally in a way that you don't experience always in your conscious mind. And I think it's really important to not only use your left brain, but to also use your right brain in concert when you're looking at problem solving. And I think that that's where art can intersect with our left brain. And in fact, I've been thinking a lot about that with music. Music is again, I shall cite social science, research, social science research, but there is a lot of social science research that talks about the visceral reactions that people have when they hear music, and they don't even, it's not in your brain, it's in your gut. Can you, I don't know, did you have any reaction to the sort of visceralness of the music that you're producing?
Shannon.
I'll talk about jazz and the movement towards free jazz and just taking away all of the, this is actually very popular in Europe as well. It's probably even more popular in Europe than in the United States. But just taking away all the boundaries associated with technique and context and just having sound as expression, and then being able to express through just the sound of instruments is pretty, you'll have a visceral reaction to that because there's nothing really to grab onto to box it in or define it by. It's just very exploratory and kind of I think the movement of the genre, especially in Europe.
I mean, I think jazz has sort of an analogy to the doodling work that you're doing. Like it's just kind of freeing the brain to not think too much, just feel the expression.
Yeah, it's absolutely. I mean, the doodling, we had this doodling manifesto that as a collective we wrote that was elevating the idea of doodling as a form of expression of identity, that the fact that it taps into a place in your subconscious. You doodle while you're in a meeting or while you're listening to music or while you're thinking about something else, and it's like everyone's fingerprint, essentially. So with the Doodle Manifesto and the piece that's outside, talking about ocean degradation, and that's such a collective human issue that we all have to address together. Doodling is also something that we can express our own individual thoughts about it and things that we want to do, and put it into a visual conversation rather than one with language, but in creating this larger piece.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I just noticed the time. So I want to get to the action piece a little bit more too. I, as I kind of was saying earlier, it's all well and good to make art and have all this great intention, but like, what is the action that's going to come from our art? And so I'm really fixated on action items. And so I'm a very type A person. And so I'll start. My call to action. I'm working on a voting project right now. I am working with a team of University of Michigan art students to turn the University of Michigan Art Museum into a voter registration / voting site for the midterms. And in this case, the call to action is we've got to vote. And I believe so deeply in the sacredness of our vote, as John Lewis said. But I've been thinking a lot about the fact that voting is also one of many civic actions that we should be taking throughout our lives. And so as part of that project, we're actually creating opportunities to have a semester. In this case, we're talking in semesters because it's at the university, but a semester's worth of learning about your responsibility as a citizen, and a citizen in terms of your engagement in our democracy and in our politic as the people. A semester's worth of actions of which voting is one of those things, not just the sort of culmination of those things. And so I've been thinking, the call to action is, thinking about like, what is your civic engagement every day, every week, once a month, and not just for some people, every 4 years, sometimes maybe, if you're really good, every couple of years. What is your civic engagement throughout the year? Any calls to action that you all want to share?
I will.
Yes, please.
So I'm going to speak to the audience on this one, and I want to drill down into that concept of DIY. no, some people say that, I personally think everybody has an artist in them. I know that other people will disagree with that, and the technique and the quality and so on and so forth is dependent a lot of times on formal training, but I just want to encourage everyone to drill down into, you know, something that really inspires you, something that makes you tick, and don't throw away this idea of do it yourself. The DIY, it creates freedom because you have the freedom to do what you want because it's yours, and put aside the costs. And I just want you to think, if you could just rope in a bunch of friends to help you with something, what would you benefit? What nonprofit would you benefit? Or what cause would you amplify with your art, or trying to get other friends to help you with their art? How could you, as a citizen, you can do things individually. Everybody does this. Everything starts out as DIY. And so what can you do is my question.
What about you, Jason?
Call to action. Yeah. I don't know. Through several election cycles in Sweden, I've been involved in especially getting people with roots outside of Europe, but who live in Sweden and who have the right to vote in Sweden, that they can realize that they actually have the right and that it is important to do it. So I've been involved in a lot of, get out and vote campaigns, both in 2014 and in 2018. And then also we have the EU elections, which are really, really important, but tend to have a way less or way lower voter turnout in Sweden because it feels a lot more distant for people. So I'd say that's the most common way that I've used it. But I don't know. I think that listening is such a good place to start. If any kind of common call to action that I'd have to anyone, and including myself, is that in any room that we find ourselves in, there's always a hierarchy of privilege, and I'm always more privileged than somebody else, and there's always somebody else that's more privileged than I am, and that the way privilege also can work is that listening to those who evidently have less privilege than you is the kind of respect that should be afforded. And just because somebody who is less privileged than you is speaking about the privilege that you hold is not to threaten or take away from that privilege, but just to have you sit with it and maybe, admit it to yourself. And I think in that instance of kind of just, intersocial communication that we go through every day, listening is the key act, not, defending yourself or being, having to counter immediately, but just really sitting with it while you listen to somebody speak about what their life or what their experiences have been.
Yeah.
And I think the world has this fantastic opportunity right now, because in the face of all this inhumanity, now it goes on and, wars are always raging, somewhere in the world. But now that it's raging at the very threshold of, Central Europe, it's really also reminded a lot of people in this country and globally of our humanity. So then let us, remember that. We've been reminded of the solidarity, the power for good that we have, of all the people who are activating themselves in their communities to help the people of the Ukraine. That there was a time when we were not as affordant. Europe was looking at the wrong side of the sculpture, and when refugees from wars that were further from Europe were coming to Europe, then they were treated as unwanted. I think about Denmark. Denmark is now, in the face of the migrant crisis, as it was called in 2015, when millions of people were fleeing Syria and came to, among other countries, Denmark. Denmark instated these very draconian laws saying that if you were holding a value of over $150, the government had the right to take that, whatever it was, be it rings, jewelry, earrings, and that was to pay for Denmark taking you in and taking care of you. They're now setting aside this in the case of Ukrainian refugees by not calling them refugees. So to get around their own hate, to be able to show love. And this is not something that that is going to go unnoticed in Sweden, Denmark, Norway, or any country. And this is something we'll be able to point to and say, remember when you were reminded of the love you are capable of? And that's really powerful.
Yep.
And we can use that to build something. And in the countries where I'm most active, which are the Nordic, that's something that I'm really interested in digging into.
Yeah, you gotta keep them accountable to that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Courtney?
I mean, I was going to say something similar in the fact that we need to talk to each other, which listening is very much a part of that, and understand, I think also a point of taking the time to reflect, to recognize the moment that we're in terms of the mental exhaustion that we experience of social media and all of the information that's just constantly coming at us, and so we grab very quickly onto sound bites that resonate with us, that are very short, and the reality is that all of these conversations require much more nuance, and we really need to recognize those points where we are just listening to sound bites, and understand that that maybe we need to dig a little deeper and ask questions and listen and sit with the complexity of the situation, because that's where we find that we start to recognize each other's humanity and understand where we have othered people and not recognized their equal humanity.
Yeah,
I mean, if I could just chime into that, because I think it's so important that we are so quick to form opinions based on these same sound bites, and sometimes even false truths or fake narratives, or just not whole pictures.
Right.
And then once we form these opinions, it's amazing how we humans will just dig in our heels to defend the opinion, rather than the very wonderful thing of having your opinion changed.
Yeah.
I'd like to go into every conversation and have, what I thought was true just really challenged, and that's how we grow, which is really not something painful. It's actually something really developmental and beautiful.
There's something to the art of unknowing. To learn how to unknow something that we feel like everything that we do know, we need to dismantle to a point.
Well, and we only have a minute left, so I'll just kind of say I've organized hundreds of conversations through the projects I've been working on, and what I have found is people are pretty bad at conversations and listening, and it's partially because we don't practice it very well, and partially because we think that just because we think talking a lot means we're having a good conversation. And anyway, so I have a lot to say about how to have a good conversation. I've actually written about it a lot, and I'd love to talk to all of you afterward. But I want to, before we end, I want to also say that Lauren Wilson is right there. Lauren, raise your hand. She works with Mia, the artist that did the love-hate sculpture. And so we're all going to be sticking around to chat, and Lauren will be here to answer any questions you have about the sculpture and about Mia's work in general. So I hope you all will stick around and chat with her. And I would love to keep talking about, how to have better conversations, how to be a better arts activist, all the things. But let's just end on sort of a quick, very quick, can art actually really change the world? Like, what do you think?
Yes.
Yeah?
It already has. Art has
has
built the world that it's been a part of building the world that we're in. It's going to keep changing the world.
Did you all come in here thinking that too? I hope so. So thank you so much for coming today. Really appreciate having you here. And I wish I could see you all so that we could actually have a more interactive engagement. So let's just talk after this. I think there's a bar over there, and I'll be over there. Also, I think,
All right.
Christine.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let's have a hand for our panel. Before you all go, wanted